All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks. I hope you're having a great day. This slide is going to pick up on slide 18 where we left off. I believe this is our fourth video for this new chapter, Ecology, Who to Kill. So we're going to find out today who's getting murdered. All right, so just to remind you again, always, of the three central problems or mysteries we hope to learn more about. Our first one is, how will species extinction impact a community of organisms? So if wildlife and plants are getting eaten by each other or using one another, what happens if one goes extinct? Next we have, how do our bodies use or lose energy? We've spent a lot of time thinking about this already. And can being a vegetarian reduce global starvation? So a lot of energy has to be used to feed all the people on this planet. So let's think about how we eat. Let's think about what we eat. Let's think about animals and plants in nature getting all the energy and foods they need. And let's keep moving along. Let's see if we can learn a little bit more about these problems. Let's head on to slide 18. Slide 18, in your notebook, you should write slide 18 and then copy this phrase down right here. It says, remaining energy from food, so the little energy we get stored from food, that 10% we get, right? Remember that we learned that each step of the way when you eat something, you only earn about 10% of what's possible because you lose a lot of the energy from your own body heat, feces or waste material, and maybe not every single portion is eaten, right? And you may recall that we kind of uneaten portions losses body heat and feces, right? So we basically only gain about 10% of the energy possible. The question is, what do we do with the 10% we get? So that remaining 10%, and I'm going to put that in parentheses, the remaining 10% of energy gained from food is used to build extra muscle, grow, or it's unused energy that's stored as fat for later use. So we either develop more muscle, we either grow our bodies, or we store that extra energy as fat. So let's check out some things. Let's see. First of all, so that extra 10% of energy we get, it gets generally, not always, but generally transformed into glucose into our blood. So if you eat carbohydrates for food energy, or if you eat protein for food energy, they generally get turned into something like glucose or sugar in the bloodstream to try to provide some energy. Up here we have up here we have fat cells. So these lighter circles are fat cells, and then we have a artery here that's transporting glucose. Let's see what happens. You can see the glucose. If you eat enough glucose, some of it will be stored as fat in your cells. And these other cells of the body will try to get that glucose from what you eat. So as you eat, it releases the glucose, that 10% you get from the food you eat, and it goes into the fat cells. Now, you might be sad if it goes into the fat cells because the more glucose you put in your fat cells, or the more energy that's stored, the larger your fat cells get and the more overweight you'll look. And I know we always want to look our best. Next, we have a crash course. I just want to quickly show you a cool little graphic about our muscles. So we know that some of the extra energy we eat, that 10% that's transferred, we know it can be stored as body fat for later use because our body's trying to keep some of it in case we have to starve later, right? It can give us sugar later. But we also have our muscles. So let's check out this little graphic that's pretty cool looking. There we go. Check this out. So we have over 600 muscles in our body. So thank you, Crash Course. They do great videos. Anytime you need to learn something really quickly, just check out Crash Course. But check this out. 600 muscles in our body. So we use a lot of our muscles to do a lot of work. And we know that when they're doing a lot of work, well, they're releasing body heat. So we're losing some energy every time they do work. And we know these muscle cells need glucose or food energy just like any other cell of the body. Maybe we can look a little bit more at muscle cells later on. All right, stay with me. Just as a quick background, let's check out what a muscle cell really looks like and how muscle cells group together to make one of the big muscles we know, like a bicep. So you can see that these little myofibril, these little things fit inside a muscle cell. So this is one muscle cell, right? And they all group together. And you can see that all these muscle cells are long strands, and they all fit together. So you have lots and lots of muscle cells that group together, and they all look like these long ropes. And they're single function. All the muscles we have to do all the work we need, whether chasing prey in the forest, like a mountain lion running after a deer, or a human throwing a football, all muscles do are these little back and forth contractions, but it takes a lot of energy. All right, so what we're going to do is move on to the next slide. Thank you, Crash Course. All right, going back to slide 18. Hopefully you've wrote slide 18 in your notebook and you've copied this down. And just thinking about body fat and just thinking about muscle that we use. Look at this. It says, I used 1,000 calories today. So let's pretend this is me, right? Let's say that I used 1,000 calories. So as I'm studying, as I'm working, as I go walking or studying, or maybe I'm taking care of my baby, my little baby Eva. Let's say that while I did that, it took 1,000 calories of energy. Let's also say that throughout the day, I have eaten 1,500 calories. This day, I had some In-N-Out fries, I had a strawberry milkshake, and I also, you know what, I saw some elotes, and that is some awesome corn grilled, and it's got some butter all over it, and so a little mayonesa, and some cheese, very yummy. And I ate that as a snack too, a delicious Mexican street food. All right, so I ate 500 more calories than I actually used. So what's going to happen with these calories? Well, just again, these calories could be pooped out. It could be excreted as waste material. It could be stored as body fat. It could be lost as body heat. So as my muscles are doing work, as I continue my day and do more exercises later, maybe my muscles will use them or lose it as body heat. And then it also could be used to grow even more muscle or repair the muscles I had. So energy is used. So that little bit, that 10% energy we get through the food chain, we use for a lot of things. So now we're going to learn some vocabulary to better describe animals in food webs or animals in food chains. So we're in high school biology, so we're going to learn some technical words to better describe organisms and what they use as energy. All right, our first definition is going to be plant. So please, in your notebook, write slide 19. And plants we call producers. You may have heard that one before. We call them producers because they produce their own food. They make food inside themselves using sun energy and a few other things from the environment or their ecosystem. Another word that we'll probably use in class to describe them is called autotroph. This word is more important for us in this class, autotroph. It's a newer word that works really well when describing plants, and it fits in really well with our definition for other organisms. So trust me, autotroph is an important word to understand. If you hear me say autotroph, we're talking about plants or things that make their own food using sun. Auto means self, and troph means food. So they self-feed themselves, or they make food inside themselves using that sun. The next step, so we have plants here, right? If you go up the food chain, though, what do we call the organisms that eat other organisms? So an organism like this grasshopper eats the autotrophs, or what would we call the organism that eats this grasshopper, like this bird? We call them, and this is the next definition for this page, right? So animals we can call consumers because they consume other things. This grasshopper consumes grass, and this bird consumes grasshoppers, right? Another word that we'll use, though, we're going to focus mostly on is this word heterotrophs. And heterotrophs mean that they eat other things for food. Hetero means other, just like if you're heterosexual, you prefer the other gender. And troph, again, means food. So we have two words. We have the plants, we're going to call them autotrophs. And we're going to call other organisms, animals like us or things in nature, we're going to call them heterotrophs because they get food from other living things and plants get food from themselves. All right, let's move on to slide 20. We have some more definitions. All right, so what I want you to draw is this, just like you see it, create 3 boxes that have arrows connecting them. So you would draw, so you'll take up some space in your notebook, maybe half a page, and just show producer or what we're calling autotroph going up to the consumers or the heterotrophs up here. All right, so I adjusted the screen a little so we can shake up the pictures and make it a little more clear. So we have our producers. We call them autotrophs because they auto-feed themselves like this grass. And then we have this arrow leading up that I want you to draw. So you're going to create this box, producer, and then have an arrow going up and drawing this new definition idea, which says plant eaters or herbivores. We'll call them primary consumers. So anything that eats the producers or anything that eats the autotrophs or plants, we call a primary consumer or heterotroph. So grasshoppers would be considered a heterotroph. Grasshoppers, because they eat autotrophs or plants, we also call them primary consumers. So there are the first organisms or animals that you see in a food chain. So if this whole thing is a food chain, just like this is a food chain, the first organism you would draw, as far as an animal, we call the primary consumer. It's the first animal in a food chain. The next animal in a food chain we would call a meat eater or a carnivore. That's old vocabulary. Our new word to describe something like this bird, which eats other animals, we call them now secondary consumer. So please think about that word secondary consumer. Practice it because you're going to use that a lot. Secondary consumers are at the top of the food chain in this example. So we have, it goes from autotrophs to primary consumer heterotroph to secondary consumer heterotroph. Again, make sure you draw these definitions and make them look like a food chain in your notebook for slide 20. All right, let's move on. We're cruising along. Keep up. Ladies and gentlemen, please in your notebook write slide 21. And slide 21 is an activity. I'm going to do half of these with you and show you how to do it, and then I'm going to let you finish the rest as I talk about them, okay? So go ahead and look at the screen. It says at the top for slide 21, so write slide 21 in your notebook. It says identify each organism as, so we have to decide for each living organism here, we have to identify them as a producer or autotroph, as a primary consumer, secondary consumer, or this new term, tertiary consumer. It just means top predator. So we have three types of consumer, or three types of animals, and then producers, or autotrophs, we should say. And we have a couple different plants, or autotrophs, okay? To figure out which of these, A through J, do we think are autotrophs, or producers? And which of these, A through J, do we think are heterotrophs? And then what type of heterotroph? Primary consumer, secondary consumer, or that tertiary consumer? All right, let's begin. We have A. A is a flower. A flower uses its own, or makes its own energy from the sun, so it automatically feeds itself, autotroph. So A is a producer. So in my notebook, I would write A equals producer for slide 21. Moving on, we have a turtle here. And this turtle, well, it's actually a tortoise. And you can look up the word or spell it however you think. But this tortoise eats plants. It is a plant eater or an herbivore. So the name for the type of animal or the type of heterotroph that eats plants, or it's at the bottom of the food chain, it's the first animal in a food chain, we call it a primary consumer. Remember in our notes, the thing that eats the plants, like this, we call primary consumer. So B equals primary consumer. C shows a shark. I'm looking at that shark. So I would write C equals, for a shark, it's a top predator. So I'm going to call it a tertiary consumer. So the type of heterotroph this shark is, C would equal tertiary consumer. Okay? I'm going to do one more, and then I'll talk about the animals. We have a cat. A cat, or this kitten, cute little thing, definitely eats other animals. I'm going to call it a secondary consumer. It may not be the top predator in the environment, but it's consuming a lot. Go ahead and pause the video and look at the rest and try to identify what you think they are. And that'll wrap up the rest of it, but go A through J. Thank you.